Very much for that warm welcome, and it's Shane and Jackson and everybody else knows it's taken a very long time to get here. I was first invited to come to this conference I think 4 years ago, and that was just at the start of COVID. All through that time we've had regular contact with James and Jackson and the team, and we've been working on this project, some of which you heard about yesterday, and really very much in touch with kind of what's going on here and desperately trying to get here. The only sadness for me is that my wife isn't with me. She was planning to come, but she got caught up back at home. But yeah, last time, if those of you who remember, the talk that I gave was actually on the social underpinnings of well-being and health, and in particular talking about the importance of the social connection that people typically or ideally experience in men's shed as a critical kind of resource for health, resilience and flourishing more generally, particularly in people who are otherwise vulnerable to threats of mental health problems, of which we've heard quite a bit already in this conference. So again, what I'm going to do today is kind of take that the next step on that journey and fill in some more of the logic around that analysis. And again, if you weren't here, I think that's online somewhere, because it was, as we said, recorded. And I think the title of that talk was something about why men's sheds are essential for mental health. And I think, as the Shadow Minister just said, I think they're a really critical part of the social fabric of Australian life, like many other voluntary organisations which draw in people with common interests and allow them to find a home, somewhere to be and to be comfortable and to socialise in kind of productive ways, and in the context of that stave off the kind of ravages of social isolation and loneliness, which again I think you'll be aware of. There's a huge national debate, I think, around what is a bit of a pandemic really of loneliness in the country. There's lots of evidence that amongst older adults, but in particular younger Australians, there are real challenges of connection. And I think this is a problem that we all have to reflect on and think about what role we can play in resolving that. And I want to frame that today really as a problem of leadership. And leadership, if you like, you can think about leadership with a sort of capital L, but you can think about it with a kind of small l. And what I'm going to talk about is going to flip between those two things. So the title of my talk is The Psychology of Leadership, or actually, to take the title from a book that I co-authored with Steve Reicher from the University of St Andrews and Michael Plato from the Australian National University, The New Psychology of Leadership. And this reflects work that we've been doing together with colleagues around the world for the last 20 or 30 years, challenging, I think, prevailing paradigms of leadership. And that's what I'm really going to encourage you today to do, is to kind of rethink what leadership means to you and how you and the people around you might do it. I think what I'm going to say actually fits with everything that we've already heard over the last day, and I think is totally consonant with that. But what I want to point to is some of the discontinuities between what leadership looks like on the ground and the kind of rarefied views we sometimes have about it, and that we sort of cultivate in particular spaces, I guess not least kind of business schools. So I want to present, as I say, an alternative to that. And I want to talk about how, and this builds on the data that Peter presented yesterday, good men's sheds exemplify, if you like, the best aspects of this new psychology of leadership. But let's start, and this is very much what Rob did yesterday, which I think is something I always encourage my students to do. Whenever you start to have a discussion about leadership with someone, I think you can very quickly discover that you're not talking about the same thing. So it's very important to define the construct. And again, if you've ever done any class that I've taught or been to any lecture I've given, this is always my second slide. It's just a definition of leadership. And it's exactly what Rob said yesterday. But it's from the Encyclopedia of Social Sciences, okay, so it's just slightly more formal. The process whereby one or more members of a group, including people who aren't formally identified as leaders, influence other group members in a way that motivates them to contribute to the achievement of group goals. Now, there's a couple of really critical things about that definition of leadership that it's important to abstract and sort of carry with us as we go on this journey. The first is that that definition makes it clear that leadership is never just about leaders. It's also always about followers. The point there is, if as a leader you don't motivate or mobilize anybody else, you don't influence them to achieve those group goals, if they don't do any followership, there is no leadership to speak of. So the proof of leadership is what other people do. And if what you do leaves them cold or unmotivated or disengaged, you haven't done leadership. It doesn't really matter what it says on your CV. It doesn't matter whether you've published 15 books or 300 articles. That counts for nothing if at the end of the day you come to this talk and you walk in and say, well, that was utter bollocks. I could have done much better things with that hour if you told me that was what I was going to be led to be exposed to. So fundamentally, again, leadership is not ultimately about what I do, it's about what you do on the basis of what we say. And similarly, that's true in all realms. It's true in politics, it's true in recreational activity, it's true in sport, and so on. It's true in education. Sometimes to sort of underline that point, I quote this poem from Bertolt Brecht. It's called, a German playwright, Fragen eines lesenden Arbeiters, which means questions from a worker who reads, "Who built Thebes of the seven gates? In the books you will read the names of kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rock? And Babylon, so many times demolished, who raised it up so many times? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who erected them? The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar defeated the Gauls. Did he not even have a cook with him?" So many questions, so many reports, so many questions. Again, as we write history, we talk about individuals who did these things, Captain Cook or whoever they might be. Well, the obvious point was, if other people hadn't done things motivated by them, then there would be nothing to speak of. But yet we tend to see leadership and everything around it through the lens of those individuals and kind of write out the role of followers. Or more particularly, we fail to understand what it is that binds followers to leaders and motivates them to engage in collective endeavor. And the fundamental point that leads us to recognize is that, and this is really where we're going to be going, is that as leadership is never about me, the leader. It's always about us, the group, the thing that binds leaders to followers. So it's a group process. In many ways, it's the archetypal group process leadership. And the other thing about leadership is, again, a lot of people are interested in leadership because they see it as an avenue to power. Okay, you get lots of money and you get to make decisions and move the chess pieces around the chessboard of life, as it were. But the leadership that we're talking about here, and again, I think this speaks to some of the things that Rob said yesterday, is not about power over others. It's not about just carrots and sticks. It's about power through others. So again, effective leadership is about providing people with the motivation and the will so that they would do those things even if you weren't there. They would say, what is it that we should be doing in this situation? What's the right thing for me to do? And they don't need somebody in there saying, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to punish you. Or if you do it, I'm going to reward you. Again, actually, if you have to be in the room to do leadership, you're not doing it very effectively in that sense. Okay, so again, there's a bit of a question there. Was that how do you get to that point? Well, again, if we kind of cut to the chase, if I only had a 2-minute talk, and some of you might wish I did, if you were going to say, like, we've got sways, there's 8, in the British Library, there are 54,000 books on leadership, including 18,000 that just called leadership. That's a lot of material, okay? I've read at least 6 of them, So But if you're going to summarize that huge literature, what does it say kind of what, if you like, leaders do and what makes a good leader? The two core observations that come through it is, one is that leaders give groups a sense of direction, a sense of like where we should be going, what the direction of travel is, and movement towards shared goals. And the second, which is equally important, recognizing that often as a group we might have goals. We might have goals to excel in sport or to win an election or whatever it might be, that we fail, things go wrong. Okay, the task of leadership in those moments is to hold the groups together. So to, if you like, be a binding agent that means that we kind of live to fight another day, so that you provide ways to allow us to kind of collectively nurse our wounds and to come back stronger and more resilient. So leadership has these two goals. And I think the second one is, in many ways, the most important, because if you can't hold the group together, then again, as we're going to see, you can't do leadership because people can't enact that collective view. You can't get group outcomes if there isn't a group to get them. And the other thing about leadership, which I think is important to reflect on, is what good leadership from the perspective of followers is what good leadership feels like. Good leadership isn't just like, oh, I read this CV and I see these things and I think, oh, that's good. Oh, this person must be smart. No, when you're on the receiving end of good leadership, it's empowering, it's enabling, it's energizing, and it's enjoyable. So it's actually kind of good fun. So again, if you're in your sheds and you're on the receiving end of good leadership in whatever form, then one of the ways in which you know you are is actually you're just enjoying what you're doing, okay? And most of the time when we're in groups and enjoying ourselves, whatever we're doing, you know, attending a Matilda's football game or whatever it might be, okay, someone's had to do some leadership in order for us to enjoy that. I sometimes say the most basic kind of site of leadership is just the family. You go on a family holiday, it's a massive leadership kind of challenge sometimes, getting everything organized and getting everybody in the car and moving, you know, and all the rest of it, and when the bookings fail and everything else. So you get there and at the end of the day, you're all together and you all have fun time. Well, you only got there because someone did some hard work to kind of make it happen. And of course, in the moment, that you kind of like forget all of that work and you just get on and enjoy the conference and the lunch and all the other things that the sort of the outcomes. But again, you've got to get to those points where people go, actually, you know what, I had a great time, or this is a really good thing and I'm really happy for whoever it was who put those things in place. And again, as a leader, that's what I'm saying, that's the end goal, is to just get that state where people aren't really reflecting on what a great leader you are, they're just enjoying themselves and doing good things together, okay? And I think sometimes that very basic goal is sometimes lost because we think in the process of doing leadership that what we really need people to do is just recognize what a great leader we are, and if they understood that, then everything else would kind of fall into place. But as we'll see, again, I keep saying as we'll see, so there's quite a lot of we'll seeing to do, you know, that's in a way it can be part of the problem. So I've talked about our book is called The New Psychology of Leadership. What are the problems with prevailing psychology of leadership, what we might call the old psychology of leadership? And the first thing is, if you look in the literature, the psychology, the sort of business management literature on leadership, most of that work, 90% of that work, just focuses on leaders alone. I'm going to give you an example of that later on. Just talks about what leaders are like. You know, what is Nelson Mandela like? What was Churchill like? You know, and so on. Okay, and you dissect them and you talk about all their characteristics, but you never talk about the followers. So you're never interested in what the followers were doing. Well, if you don't think about how their leadership landed from the perspective of followers, you're never going to really understand what was going on there. And again, that empirically, that just proves to be the case. Secondly, the traditional approaches to leadership tend to see leadership as a quality that somebody has. This person is just a great leader, and that will be recognized by everybody. So if you're a really good leader, everybody will know it and everybody will put their hands up and say, what a fantastic job you've done here, have a medal and thanks very much, kind of thing. But again, the reality on the ground is that isn't what leadership looks like at all. That typically, leaders take some people with them and they leave other people behind. I'm sure the minister knows that in politics, okay? If you're talking to a group of people, yeah, you're going to take your followers with you, but you're going to leave other people cold. Okay, so that doesn't, how are we capturing that in our understanding of leadership? The idea that to be on the receiving end is a very diverse experience. And again, if we just imagine, no, there's this thing, good leadership, we've got to chase that down, again, and we're neglecting the thing that is, if you like, translating it into a positive or not so positive experience in other people, we're going to kind of miss a large part of the story. And the third point to take from that, from this kind of traditional approach, again, if you look at my discipline as a psychologist, all of the leadership literature focuses on the psychology of leaders as individuals. What was this person like, and what am I, Alex, like as an individual, or Jackson, or Shane, or whoever it is? What is it that those people are kind of like? Let's dissect their psychology as individuals. Whereas actually, and that reflects, I think, in psychology, a kind of preoccupation with the individual self, the I and the me of psychology. But actually there's another self that we use all the time, the self of us and we. When we talk about us Queenslanders, or us Western Australians, or us Australians, or us members of this particular political party, or us Lions supporters, or whatever it happens to be, okay, that's not just a figure of speech, it reflects the fact that groups matter to us and they're part of our collective sense of self. And as we're going to see, that's absolutely critical to leadership, but leadership literature never engages with the self in those terms. But this is a quote, and I'm going to give you some data in it later on that again underlines this point. This is a quote from John Adair, in which he says, observes, that the least important word in the leader's vocabulary is I, and the most important word is we. Well, if that's true, and broadly speaking it is, the question then is, well, why are we led to think about leadership in terms of I? And why is the literature on leadership written in the first person singular? The alternative psychology that we present, and again, this builds on the stuff I presented last time, so out of respect to you, I haven't gone all over all those slides and talked about the importance of social identity for leadership. Social identity refers to the sense of self that we derive from membership in a social group. That's different from personal identity. My personal identity is me, Alex, the unique idiosyncratic individual. My social identity is as an Australian, as an academic, as a Lions supporter, you know, those things, as a member of my family and so on. So those things furnish me with a sense of us. So I can talk about us Haslams, or us Lions supporters, us Queenslanders, and so on, okay? What I'm going to talk about is the importance of social identity for leadership. So the core argument, or the three arguments that I want to kind of tease out from this analysis, and again, there's a really long theoretical, empirically sort of validated analysis, but I'm going to cut to the chase here. The first point is that leaders, if they're going to be effective, need to embody a social identity, that is a sense of usness that is shared with other group members. And they exert influence on that basis, okay? So again, I, as a member of a group, as a leader of a men's shed, I exert influence by virtue of my ability to represent what that men's shed is about. And other people are influenced by me to the extent I represent the group. They're not influenced by me because of who I am as an individual. They're influenced by me to the extent that I embody what we are about. And again, that's true in every walk of life. It's true in business, it's true in politics, it's true in sport, it's true in education, and so on. Again, when you listen, you're listening to me now, thank you, not because of who I am as an individual, but because of something about what you think I represent for us as a whole. Somebody who might know something interesting about men's sheds and might be in a position to talk to us about that. Okay, but if I just stopped the slideshow now and got out my holiday slides and started talking about things that I've done interesting in the past, you'd think, you'd think something was very awry, okay? And actually, I always think when you hear people talk all the time, and you come to talk, you're with the talk, and the bit where you lose them is when they just start rambling on about some little thing that's happened to them in the past, and you think, mate, fantastic, I don't give a shit, like so again. And I'm mindful of it now because I'm a bit of an outsider. I'm an academic. I'm a Queenslander. So I've got to, again, I needed to be here yesterday to kind of find out something about the group as a whole to make sure I didn't do anything horribly offensive, like turn up in a suit, like James. So anyway, okay. So the second point there is that, following from that, is that without social identity, there can be no leadership. We can only lead if there is an us to lead. Again, I can only lead my political party if there is a party. I can only lead my football team if there's a team. So in many cases, they're absolutely, and I'm going to come to this too, I'll stop saying that. The first task of leadership is to create that group, is to create that sense of us that you can represent and connect. Because if there isn't one, you can't do it. It seems such an odd point in a way. I'm saying you can't do leadership if there isn't a social identity to represent, if there isn't an us. So whatever walk of life you're in, if there's no group there that you're engaging with and leading, no psychological group, then your leadership's just going to fall flat. And again, you can put that to the test. Lots of you are doing leadership all the time in your men's sheds because of the social identity that's in that place. But if you go onto the street corner and just start talking about stuff or trying to persuade people about things, they'll just ring the police and take you away. Now is to say that leadership then centers on a leader's ability to create, represent, advance, and embed a shared, special sense of usness that they advance and promote for the group that they lead. And it's that process in our research that we refer to as identity leadership. So it's about creating a group, creating a sense of us, representing it, advancing it, and embedding it. And in the book and elsewhere in our work, we kind of tease out those four components. And again, yesterday, Pete stole a little bit of thunder here. He talked about these things that were in the survey that you got. They have kind of fancy names in the psychological literature. The first one is called, which is about being one of us, is called identity prototypicality. So you have to be prototypical or representative of the group. In more simple terms, you have to be or be seen to be one of us. Secondly is identity advancement. You need to be seen to be doing it for us. Third, you need to craft a sense of us, and that goes in literature as a process of identity entrepreneurship. And finally, you need to make us matter, and that is a process we refer to as identity impresarioship. Again, I've said this just a second ago, because it's an important point, I'll reiterate it. Without social identity, there can be no leadership. We can only lead if there is an us to lead. And two important points follow from that. And these, I've just put this bit in the slide yesterday based on some of the conversations that were bouncing around on the basis of other presentations, which I think were really good observations. But the first is that you can't lead if you don't know who us is. One of the biggest mistakes that any would-be leader can make is just turn up into a group and say, look, I've got this fantastic experience in whatever it is, sport, politics, business, education, and now I'm going to divest my wisdom to you and how lucky you are to get it, okay? And let's, if I don't understand the group that I'm trying to lead, I can't hope to influence them. Again, so that very simple thing, that's like, I really don't like to just fly into a conference, give a talk and go out. Because I think often people just go, well, who was that? What was that about? So again, more generally, and I think several of the presentations yesterday made this point, if you really want to lead a shed, the first thing you've got to do is understand what the shed's about. What are the people here for? Talk to them, listen. And, and this, I'm really bad at this, I have to say, but, if you're in a situation where you're needing to do leadership, you should not be doing the talking to start with. You might need to say, here's an invitation, come to a meeting or whatever. But more generally, your first job is to find out why people are there, what has brought them there, and what ultimately they're trying to get out of it. But if you're always in transmit mode, which again is, I think, often a takeaway that you get from certain sorts of leadership programs, that can be a real problem. And the other point is that, if you follow on that, the more people that are in a group, a men's shed or whatever it happens to be, a football team, who get what us is about, the more people in your shed who understand and who we are, the more people there will be who can do leadership. Okay. Now remember at the beginning I said leadership is a process whereby one or more members of a group influence other group members in a way that motivates them to contribute to the achievement of group will. I just said one or more members of a group. I did not say leaders. I just said people in a group who understand the group, can do things to help other people achieve the goal. So someone needs picking up to come to the men's shed. Okay, Rob, could you do that? Yeah, that's leadership, okay? Because you've motivated somebody to go do something that contributes to a group goal. But again, Rob or whoever it is can't do those things if they don't understand what's the group about. And what you're trying to do, we do a lot of work, 20-30% of our research is in kind of sporting contexts. And one of the core goals there is to have in any football team, we did a long time ago when I was at ANU, worked with Rick Charlesworth with the Australian women's hockey team, who were famous for women's sport long before the Matildas. One of his kind of key concepts that he was working with in the women's hockey team was to create what he referred to as a leaderful team. I don't know if you can remember back then, hockey didn't get the sort of publicity that soccer did, which I think it's great that we've progressed. But one of the things he did away with was the idea of a team captain. He wanted to rotate the captains because he was worried that if you had a team captain, people would say, oh, you're the captain, you just get on with it then, you do it all. He wanted everybody to own that leadership role and to step up and do it, and be able to do that. And it was a recipe for huge success, okay? So your goal in your shed is not to say, I'm the leader and suck it up, is to make as many people in your shed leaders as possible. And the only way that you can do that is by getting everybody to understand what we are and to buy into that vision of what we are. Again, a successful academic department or a successful political party, everybody knows what their role is and everybody buys into that collective vision. So let's just unpick this. And again, I'm not actually saying anything that you didn't hear yesterday. You probably worked that out. What I'm going to do, I'm a scientist, what I do is get evidence that kind of nails some of these flags to the mast, if you like. And I think that's important because at some level I've made some quite strong claims. And you might say, is that really right? Okay, so let's have a look. Okay. I said this thing that leaders need to be in-group prototypes. They're going to be more effective, the more influential, the more that they're perceived to represent a social identity that we share. They need to be seen as one of us, not one of them, okay? In all walks of life, being seen as one of them, whoever they are, is very problematic for your leadership. Here's an interesting, my cousin and I did a lot of stuff around the US 2016 election and the rise of Donald Trump and so on. It's a very kind of fascinating phenomenon. In a particular sense, a very particular sense, I'm very grateful to Donald Trump because he demonstrated the foolhardiness of most theories of leadership. At the exit polls in the 2016 election, a majority of Democrats, unsurprisingly, but also a majority of Republicans agreed that Hillary Clinton had more of the sort of qualities that would want in a leader than Donald Trump. They perceived her as more intelligent and blah, blah, blah. So everybody thought she had more leadership qualities. But of course she didn't win the election, okay? Because at the end of the day, it's not about having those qualities. I don't give a shit if you're intelligent and charming and good looking and courageous if you're batting for the other team, okay? That's a simple point. So this was a Republican senator, Duncan Hunter, and he was very, in the rise of Trump, he was very kind of upset with some of the things that Trump was doing, as were many people, and he went to see Donald Trump to kind of talk through some of his issues, and he when he was interviewed after this meeting, he came out on the steps of the building where he'd met, Trump Tower or whatever, and the journalist says to him, okay, so you met this guy, you know, there's a bit of tension there, what was he like? And he says, well, you know, pretty much what I expected. The guy's an arsehole, or actually he said he's an asshole because he's American. He's an asshole, but he's our asshole, okay? So, and the point there was, yeah, like at the end of the day, if you give people a choice between voting for their, you know, perfect leader and our arsehole, people will go for our arsehole every time, okay? It's a sad fact maybe, but it's kind of true. And so what you're looking for in a leader, and when we put this into the survey, the item that we have there, and there's a different version of this, but the short version is just, this leader is a model member of my group. This person is about what my group is about, okay? And that's the question that you as a follower are wanting to have answered. So when people look to you as the leader of a share, they say, is this person a model member of my group? So one of the things that, when Rob asked questions, I think one of the first things someone over here said, yeah, you've got to be a good role model. You do. You can't tell other people not to leave their rotten food in the fridge and then leave all your rotten food in the fridge, okay? It's that type of thing. So my father was in the army and he was kind of really particular about those kinds of things. If other people see what you do and don't do, okay, much more than you imagine, and if you don't get those things right, if you don't follow the code of what it means to be a member of the group, you're going to find it very difficult to lead people. Again, you might say, well, thanks very much, where's some evidence? Well, this is some research led by my colleague, Nick Steffens. This is 251 empirical studies around the world testing that basic proposition, over 32,000 people in pretty much everywhere on the planet. The more a leader represents what we are about, the more influential they are. Pretty much every one of those effects is well to the right of that midpoint. The overall effect size, for those of you who are into stats, and I can see you are hugely, is the overall effect size there is 0.38. If you square that, you get that explains about 20% of the variance, which is quite a lot. If you take the best single factor, or single individual level predictor of leadership, it's intelligence, a person's intelligence. The correlation between intelligence and leadership effectiveness is about 0.16, and if you square that, you get about 4%. So this explains about 5 times more variance than the best single individual level predictor. So yeah, all things being equal, it's better to be intelligent than stupid, okay? But it's much better to be one of us than to be one of them, okay? Interestingly too, just as a quick aside, because it's a point worth making, intelligence doesn't predict leadership very much, I've just said that. But perceived intelligence does, okay? So actually perceived intelligence correlates about 0.6, so it explains a lot of variance in leadership. So if I say, is some political person or is someone your boss, are they intelligent? Okay, that is going to predict whether or not. If you say yes, they are, you're going to vote for them. You're going to do what they say in the office. Okay. But the interesting thing is, do you know what the correlation between intelligence and perceived intelligence is? Well, it's about 0. Okay, so again, again, intelligence. It's the intelligence that you perceive, not the sort of formal intelligence, how you do on an intelligence test, that really kind of matters in the leadership space. And again, that leadership and intelligence is actually, and this is some other research for us, is actually an emergent property of shared social identity. So the more that I perceive you to be one of us, the more intelligent I think you are. That kind of makes sense if you think about it. Okay, because if you're not one of us, you must be stupid. Okay, you know, like if that's effectively the logic. Or indeed, I'm not interested in valorizing your intelligence. So again, if you don't like academics, you say, oh yeah, that guy, he had very kind of bookish intelligence, but I think he was thick as picture. You know, I don't think he could sign a check. You know, if we had them. You know, so you know that sort of point. Okay. So to understand, so leaders need to understand and represent group identity to be effective. I'll just give you another empirical example, which I think is kind of a bit more down to earth and speaks to some of the things that we were talking about yesterday. This was a study that a colleague of mine in the University of Exeter, when I was there, did with Marines who were down at Lympstone. And we were following commandos who were going through training to in the Marines, and we were following them over a period of time throughout their training. One of the things, if you go through Commando College or the training centre down at Lympstone, is at the end of that, all of the people who are on the training, they vote for people to get this medal, which kind of recognises who's the best leader in the group. And most military units have that sort of honour or something like that. Anyway, what we did was just track how those people, how those commando recruits represented themselves to the group, and ultimately how many votes they got from the group in that process. And we tracked that over 32 weeks or something like that. And this is what we found. We were interested in whether or not those those commandos were interested in their own identity as a leader, like I'm here to develop as a leader, and and I am a leader, and that's what I want to be, a leader, or whether they were interested in the group. I want to find out more about this group and help the group. So who do you think ended up getting the medal? Okay, well, it's very simple. That actually the people who said, yeah, I'm here to do leadership and to be a leader, and were interested in their own leader identity, no, they didn't get the medal. They never got any votes. It didn't predict any outcomes at all, any positive outcomes at all for them. What did predict whether or not you got the medal was whether or not you cast yourself in the role of a good follower, someone who saw their first job as being to try to understand what the group was about. That's in the Harvard Business Review. It's online, so you can read that paper if you like. But again, the point there is what predicts whether you're seen as a leader by your peers is whether you present yourself as someone who is interested in the group rather than in themselves. Another really simple point here, and I'm just going to, this is another study, I just put this in this morning, and just to pick up on a point that again came up in the conversation yesterday. One of the points in this space is about attention. Who do we attend to? And well, there's 1,000,001 people telling me about their wonderful leadership, whatever it might be, and this thing, that, or the other. You know, think of all the football teams in Australia. Everyone's there doing leadership, but of course the leadership that you hone in on is the leadership of your team. Okay, I'm not, you know, the fact that in Collingwood, arseholes, that they might have good leadership, and obviously they did, you know, that doesn't do anything for me. I'm interested in the leaders of my group and what kind of they're up to. And the point there then is that we pay attention to people who represent us. I mean, if you think about what you watch on television, you tune into those channels and those news sources that kind of represent what you're about, because you want to find out about us. You're not desperately interested in what those people think. Okay, so, and here's just, again, you might think, oh well, okay, here's just this study. Like, I am not a neuroscientist, and I sort of hate neuroscience in a particular way. As I say, like, we invested as a country like $6 billion in neuroscience. What did it do for us in the pandemic? Nothing. Actually, what did basic social science do? Huge amounts. Okay, it's just an aside. It's just a little thing to get off my chest. Okay, but here's the thing, and again, when neuroscientists always put these things up, but this was the study that we did. We put people into a scanner, basically, and we got them to listen to political speeches from someone who was a leader of a political party that they supported, and someone who was a leader of a political party they didn't align with, they didn't support. And basically we looked at what happened. And the key bit, sort of what, you know, put in simple terms, is that when your leader spoke, you listened, your brain lit up, okay? But when the other leader did, nothing happened. It was like nobody was home, okay? But there's again, the reason I put that slide up, right, is, again, there's a big neuroscience now about leadership. There's quite a big investment in it. And they all focus, again, it's a simple point. All of those studies, go and look them up if you're interested, and they've all got, what they've got in the scanner is leaders, okay? No, I want the scanners, I want the brains of followers, okay? I want to know what they did. These are the brains of followers. Were they engaged with what leaders had to say? Again, what the brains of leaders like might be interested, but in the absence of knowing whether it made any difference to followers, there's nothing to talk about, is the point, okay? Another kind of point, following up then, the second point. So I've done leaders are in-group prototypes. The other thing is that leaders need to be in-group champions. They're more likely to engender creative followership the more they are perceived to stand up for a social identity that we share. And their leadership will be compromised if they place out-group or personal interests above those of an in-group. So again, in the survey, what that looks like is an item like, this leader is a champion of my group. This leader is a champion of my shed, is what it said in the survey. Well, again, there's lots of, I'll have a break from some of the empirical evidence, so let's look at some sort of historical cases. This is Louis XIV, okay, in the sort of summer of 1655 or whenever it was, he came out with a whole series of statements about like what his leadership was going to look like. He said this: sovereignty resides in my person alone, and my courts derive their existence and their authority from me alone. They exercise it only in my name, and it may never be turned against me. I alone have the power to legislate. That power is indivisible. The phrase that he came up with on the back of that was "l'état, c'est moi." The state is me. Okay. Well, good for you, Louis. If that's what you really think, go for it. And a couple of years later, he was dead. Okay, his head was chopped off. Because again, you might think that you alone have the power to legislate, and you alone have the authority to do this, that, and the other. But if you don't take the people with you, they won't like it. Okay. Another sort of more kind of interesting case. This is Jose Mourinho. Former manager of AC Roma and Chelsea and Manchester United and Tottenham. So a really interesting case of like the decline of, as it were, the great leader. I think early in his career, Mourinho was very effective. He really mobilised groups, did really well in teams. And then as things progressed, he got quite excited about the publicity around his own leadership and started to think that it was all about him. And his famous kind of sobriquet was the special one. Okay, so again, if you're in your shed, right, here's the thing. Don't put something like that on a wall, picture of yourself, and just say the special one. Okay, it's not going to work. And again, if from there on, it was a disaster. The only thing that was keeping him in the game was his CV, and at the end of the day, that wasn't enough because he couldn't take the locker room. Okay, look on the other side of the equation. So we talk about the French Revolution. There's a lot of research by a great Melbourne historian, Timothy Blanning, in which he asked the question like, why did the French monarchy wither and why was it got rid of while the British monarchy survived and went on to thrive? And he argues that actually it went back to historically the British monarchy had a whole thing about the divine right of kings and all of this sort of thing about how they were just untouchable and they were better than everybody else, and that's why they were due to be leaders. But he argues that as things progressed and they kind of were a bit more in touch with kind of what was going on on the ground, and in particular a speech that he singles, two things that he singles out. He singles at the same time as Louis XIV was saying those things I just said. George III, who had his own problems because he was like mad, but he said this: I do not pretend to any superior abilities, but will give place to no one in meaning to preserve the freedom, happiness, and glory of my dominions and all their inhabitants, and to fulfill the duty to my God and my neighbour in the most extended sense. In other words, I'm here for you. And he argues that it was because George said that, and that made it very clear that his primary role was to serve others, that actually the monarchy survived. And he also argues that that sentiment can be traced back to this speech by Elizabeth I on November 13th, 1601, sometimes described as the most important speech in the English language. Okay. At the time Elizabeth had come to the throne, she was a woman, the country was divided, there were Catholics and Protestants were like killing each other. It was all very, very bad. People were very skeptical about her ability to meld the country together. So, and again, all groups, political parties, men's sheds, departments, we have those issues where there's internal conflict, okay? So can leaders bring people together? Well, the evidence is that Elizabeth did. And it's often traced back to this speech, the Golden Speech. And if you've seen the film Elizabeth with Cate Blanchett, this is the end sequence of that film. Okay. And what she says this: "Of myself, I must say this, I never was any greedy, scraping grasper, nor yet a waster. My heart was never set on worldly goods, but only for my subjects' good. And though you have had and may have many mightier and wiser princes sitting in this seat, you never had, nor shall have, any that will love you better." Okay? I think those words are still powerful today. They're saying, as a leader, my first job is to look after you and to love you, okay? And again, the obvious point there is if you're doing shared communications, don't channel Louis, channel Elizabeth, okay? The point there is, yeah, and I'm sure, again, I think there's plenty of evidence if you look at communications, we do studies, that indeed that's exactly what leaders do. Everything that they do is about respecting, valorizing, engaging with, loving the group. And the minute you think that it's like Jose Mourinho, it's not about the group, it's about me, that's where things start to go awry. So far we talked about like just kind of representing, advancing the group. But the obvious thing there, the third point is, but what if there isn't a group to represent? What if I'm just herding cats? I've just got a rabble of people, a motley assemblage of people who turn up to my shed every week. You couldn't call them a group, there's nothing going on there. Well, what you see is, and again, history gives lots of interesting kind of examples of this, is that effective leaders are really good at gelling people, cohering them into a group. And again, I think that, again, a lot of what goes on in sheds, that we talked a lot about the woodwork and the bits and pieces. All of those things are about making connections, common activity, things that just create a sense that we're sort of on the same page. Little micro communications that just say, yeah, we're all in this together. And again, leaders are really sensitive to the things that they're doing that communicate that and build that sense of usness. Hard to build and convey a sense of us, and they craft identity to ensure that they and their vision are prototypical then of that usness that they've created. So again, an item there that sort of captures that is this idea that a leader creates a sense of cohesion within my group. This is Terry from the local men's shed just down the road from me, Debra in Queensland. This was a line, and again, I'd put it in there because it's something that we've heard lots of times at this meeting and previous ones. We make a lot of good things in our shed, but the most important things that we make are social connections. Okay, so, and in many ways, the business of the woodwork, the business of the metalwork, the business of all the other things that you do are fundamentally about bringing people together and cohering them around this sense of common purpose. But again, it takes work, and it's something that's in everything that you do, your communication, where you talk. Here's another very different type of study that is the proof of that. This is again another study that Nick and I did a few years ago now, in which we looked back at Australian federal elections dating back to Federation in 1901. And at the time, there had been 43 elections, okay? And we looked at the speeches of the two main candidates in those elections, and we looked at the number of times that they used collective pronouns, that's we, us, and our, or personal pronouns, I and me, and mine. Well, if you look at the speeches of successful leaders, they use we and us once every 79 words. That's a lot, okay? So if you like, that's the thing they talk most about is we and us, okay? If you look at the speeches of the people who went on to lose those elections, they used we and us once every 136 words, half as much, okay? And in 34 of those 43 elections, the winner was the person who used the collective pronouns the most. We just this last week, just a couple of months ago, finished a study with some German colleagues looking at the German stock exchange, in which we looked at the communications by CEOs and to their shareholders and looked at the value of those communications for the company subsequently. And the bottom line was that every every pronoun, every personal pronoun, every time the CEO spoke about I and me, didn't make any difference to any outcomes at all. But when they spoke about we or us, it added, and it's a pretty staggering figure, it was 836,000 euros to the value of the country for a single pronoun, okay? And what you see, so if you can't talk about us, if you can't speak to us, if you can't invoke it, you've got a problem. So the first thing is you need to create a sense of us, and then you just need to bang on about it, like, because that's why we're here, okay? So again, okay, and this is a really important point, which I think often goes missing in action in the leadership literature. Leadership is not about just talk. It's not about, of course those things are important, but fundamentally it has a material dimension, a doing dimension, a change dimension, okay? And the way we capture that is through this idea, the idea that leaders are identity impresarios. The sort of item that captures that is the idea that a leader creates structures that are useful for my group. So more particularly what leaders do is create identity embedding structures, activities, events, festivals, rituals, buildings. Someone yesterday, I put in the word events there because that's sort of obviously there. But events are incredibly important. This conference is an act of identity impresarioship that brings us all together to live out our shared valued identity. That's leadership in action. It has this material dimension. One of the things I really love about men's sheds is that they're sheds. They're things, like they're cathedrals, as it were. Again, I've got a picture in the background of St. Paul's, you know, and I'm going to come to him in a minute. But again, the point about Christianity, say, or Islam, is you create structures which allow people, I can go to another state or another country and I can find a church and I can go in and I can do my identity. I can be us with my spiritual community. That's incredibly important. So the physical dimensions of identity are massively important, as men said. I said, and that then, when you create those physical structures, providing that they're inhabited by people who share an identity, there's no point, and this big thing, this is why a lot of aid fails, there's no point just building something expensive in a field and saying, there you are, there's your resource. You've got to do the identity work to allow people to inhabit it and feel comfortable and engage with it. That's really critical. But fundamentally, you've got to build the shed. You've got to do the thing. And that's also why when people are in the business of destroying other groups, one of the things they do is tear down their buildings, burn them and all the rest of it, topple the statues and so on. Because those things are physical structures around which identity coheres. This is a quote, so when I give lectures on organizational change, the example I always give is St. Paul. St. Paul, as you might know, he was in the business of persecuting Christians, but then he, on the way to Damascus, he kind of saw the light and he said, no, this is all wrong, okay? This is all wrong. We need to go that way. And in the process then, he went about effectively engendering a form of organizational change that led to the creation of the Christian church as we know it. Prior to St. Paul, or Saul as he was, the church was just a sort of random collection of sects all doing kind of different things. But what Paul did was produce a sort of set of code books or guidelines and more particularly activities like baptism and like the Lord's Supper that allowed people to come together and live out that identity and to do Christianity. And it's that, and again, when you do events in your men's shed, effectively that's what you're doing. These are identity festivals that allow people to celebrate what it means to be a shed member. I'm sure you don't say, we're having an identity festival next week's chat. You just say, it's a sausage sizzle. But that, psychologically, that's kind of what it was. And sorry, the key social achievement of Paul's community forming enactions consisting in the bringing together of many people into one body, the construction of new forms of solidarity. And often I think when we're trying to achieve change in the world, the critical thing is to provide or to work out what are those structures that we can put in place that will bring people together to cohere around. I'm not suggesting you build a cathedral or whatever, but think about what are the events that are going to bring people together. How are we going to make these different things recede into the background relative to the things that we have in common? And good leaders work really hard to kind of identify those things and structure them in ways that are inclusive of all of the voices and all of the different opinions or attitudes within a given collective. So I'm going to wrap up now. I mentioned the Matildas kind of early on. What I want to kind of leave you with is the point that to understand that leadership is a we process, not an I process. And that in order to understand it, we need to move beyond the individualistic models that have dominated the field today, which are all about I, me, the leader. You go on a leadership course, you pay shitloads of money, and you go on a 5-star resort up a mountain, and someone tells you about what type of person you are. Actually, I don't give a shit what you're like. I need to know how you're going to work with this group. Okay, you might like it, and I'm not saying if you've been on those things, great, enjoy the lunch. Just don't imagine it's got anything to do with leadership. Okay. Leadership's a we thing, not an I thing, and so is its psychology. I think during the Matilda's thing, I did an interview with Radio National in which I was kind of talking about this, and it was kind of interesting, I think. It was but one of the I thought was really fascinating in the sort of rise of the Matildas was as the tournament progressed and people got more and more excited, and there was a whole thing about Sam Kerr and her calf. The only thing I ever heard her say was at one point that a journalist was kind of going, yeah, but tell us about this and tell us about your calf. She said, I don't want to talk about me, I want to talk about us. Again, and just cut through it all. But it was really interesting that the pressure on them is always to bring it back to me. And actually, if you're a good leader, you've got to say, no, it's not about me. It's about kind of us and point to the us. And again, the minute that you stop doing that, and the minute you start to believe that publicity, and you go down that rabbit hole, it takes you to a kind of a dark place. So what can we do about this? First, recognise that social identity or usness is a key resource for leadership. It's the key resource for leadership. And then you need to work with people to try to build and harness that resource. So again, whatever groups that you're leading, again, whether it's a department or a men's shed or a political party, find out what identities matter to people. And again, any successful politician will tell you that if you don't spend time talking to the members, you're rooted. Okay, so you have to understand what are the concerns of people, where are they coming from psychologically, and you need to kind of reflect and listen. Secondly, identify and hone the goals and aspirations associated with different identities and facilitate activities that help to achieve them. That's representing. That's again what I've been talking about. And then you need to integrate, because again, in the departments or in a sport team or whatever it might be, there's lots of different identities at play. So then your job is to kind of integrate those different identity-related goals and align them with higher order priorities for things like justice and equality and fairness and those kinds of things that we as a superordinate sort of category hold kind of dear. And then you need to embed those in practices and policies. Again, I was having a lot of discussions with people yesterday about, you suddenly realise you've got a bit of a problem. You showed you guys, actually we don't really have a policy on respectful treatment of members. We don't have a thing which actually says this is our sort of code of conduct and these are the things we expect of you. Again, you don't need to sort of ram it down everybody's throat, but you do need to know there's rules on this playing field, okay? And again, if you're in sport only works if everybody understands the rules. If they don't, you've got a problem. So as a leader, your first job is to indeed clarify what those rules are and to make sure that, again, you live them out in the things that you do. Well, those things are referred to as the 3 R's of identity leadership, and our own kind of leadership development program is really about that. And over the last, again, I'm not here to talk about this, but the last decade or so, we've done research really around the world with people like the Royal Air Force, The Australian Air Services, air traffic controllers and so on across Australia. But also we've had a 5-year project with the House of Commons in the UK with all of their staff working to if you like, get everybody there on the same page in terms of the way that they are doing leadership. But, and again we're really close to the end here now, an important point is that social identity isn't just about performance and engagement. I said, yes, social identity is a base for leadership, and it's also a basis for engaged groups, which is kind of what you want. And therefore, building social identity has to be a task that is at the heart of any program that aims to build leadership. But this is where it ties in with the last talk that I gave. Social identity is also absolutely critical for mental health too. So another really, and that's again, I talked about the new psychology of leadership, but last time I talked about the new psychology of health. So another reason for really being interested in usness is that it's, and again, we have lots of data on that in dementia, is that it's foundational to mental health. So doing us well is not just about leading us, it's also about keeping us healthy. Just again, I'm just going to wrap up with a bit of evidence from around the world. We've now done studies in over 20, I think it's now 32 countries, many thousands of people. And the key point is that in all of those countries, in all of those studies, every single one of those different contexts, identity leadership predicts the outcomes that I've been talking about. It predicts identification, performance, innovation in organisations and health over and above any other single thing that you're measuring. So that you might be interested in. So again, if you want to know if your leadership is working, you effectively need to ask these 4 questions. Is the leader, and again, you just think about any leader or anyone you're interested in, and you can think about someone you don't like as well. And well, if you are, I'm going to know how motivated you are to, if you like, engage in followership around their leadership by understanding how you respond to those questions. And again, just to come back then, to bring it all back to the whole men shed piece, to just underline the points that Peter made yesterday. So in that survey that he talked about, we indeed had those 4 questions about identity leadership. Leaders are model members of my shed, leaders are champions of my shed, leaders create a sense of cohesion within my shed, leaders create structures that are useful for my shed. I hope I've explained to you why those things are all incredibly important. But again, what you see is that those things are very good predictors of social identity, shared social network quality, psychological safety. Again, we talked a lot about this yesterday. They all flow from good identity leadership. So effectively what we're saying there is social identity is a basis for really strong social connection in a shed. And then that in turn is a basis for, these things are good predictors, very good predictors of well-being, absence of depression, meaning in life, and the absence of loneliness. So what that's saying then again is identity leadership builds social connection, which advances and promotes mental health, which again is what men's sheds I think are all about. It doesn't say on the wall this is a mental health centre, clearly. but fundamentally, again, that when people come to sheds, I think that if they go there and they make some bits of work, they do things, and in the process they are healed, then they will thank you for it and they will celebrate your leadership. Okay, in important and powerful ways. So to conclude then, this is the last slide we've got tonight. It's not quite actually, sorry. Because I split it up this morning. At their best, I think men's sheds exemplify the new psychology of leadership perfectly. In them, members engage in leadership by creating, representing, advancing and embedding a sense of shared social identity, a sense of us that is bigger than any of our needs. This in turn is a basis for shared members to be socially connected and safe, and to be engaged and mentally healthy in ways suggested by the new psychology of health. And so this is the point I kind of want to leave you with, which I think is now, having made that case, the thing is, okay, so kind of where next? What follows on from this. And I think for me, again, why I'm interested in mensheds and why I think they're incredibly kind of important as part of the social fabric of Haslam, which everybody who's here has talked about, including all of the people who've been sort of honourable and distinguished guests. As an antidote to expensive executive programs where would-be leaders learn how to do the psychology of me, perhaps mensheds should develop hands-on programs in which people learn to do the psychology of us. I think Australia spends about $10 billion a year on leadership development. That's a staggering sum of money. As a scientist, I cannot stand here and say to you that the return on that investment, I can't say to you with any confidence that the return on that investment is greater than zero, okay? I don't think that we get a very good return on that investment in leadership development. Some bits of leadership development are really excellent, but some are actually harmful and destructive. And the ones that are really harmful and destructive are the ones that send people away and they basically join the cult of me and actually go away and discover what a wonderful person you are, what a great leader I am. And yeah, and you know what? People will pay a lot of money to find out that they're wonderful. Okay, that's a thing. Okay, all right. But just because they say it, just because you think it's true, doesn't make it true. I think fundamentally, again, for me and when we do our own leadership development programs, the fundamental thing about leadership is you have to work with a group on a challenging set of problems. You have to go and get your hands dirty dealing with the difficult issues that people confront on a daily basis in a department, in a political party, in a sports team, in a men's shed. Okay? One of the big problems I think with executive leadership programs is they don't give people that experience. They never give them a group to lead. They just have a think about it. Okay? Actually, and I think one of the bigger problems, and again I've been having this conversation on Wednesday, I think in Australian society is that people don't have those places where you can learn about leadership and make horrible mistakes. You can get it horribly wrong, but you can come back the next day and do it better, okay? If we don't have those workshops, those laboratories of leadership, then I think as a country we're going to have a leadership deficit. And I think we do have a leadership deficit, because I think there's too many people who are doing the cult of me and not enough who are doing the cult of us. And so I think it's time for us to get the agenda back and say, no, come down to my men's shed and we'll show you how to do it.